This Impact Wrestling review was brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Try it, and the next time a talent's contract expires, TNA won't put them over at the expense of the company on their way out the door. Apparently, someone reminded TNA that they have a pay-per-view coming up pretty soon, because this week, they finally got off their ass and started putting the show together. Still not as quickly as they should, though. I mean, come on, guys, the clock's ticking here. I mean, you should have the full card announced by now. But at least they're doing something. The problem with a lot of it, however, is that I'm still not sure what that something is. They've taken this really weird approach with several storylines where once the match has been made, you can see how it was set up, but what the match was going to be exactly wasn't clear until after the match was made. Take this Magnus thing, for example. He's doing this gauntlet match against Ego. He beats Daniels, beats Kaz, loses to Rude due to Kaz interfering. Match is solid, no complaints. Magnus is having sort of a meltdown post-match, so Sting comes out, and long story short, they're going to have a match at Bound for Glory, and Sting is going to put Magnus on the map. This exchange between them was awesome. Great promos, the best part of the show in my opinion. And now that we know it's Sting versus Magnus at Bound for Glory, we can look back on the last several months and it sort of makes sense. But it didn't make sense until we got to this point. I mean, as late as last week, it looked like Magnus was going to face one of the members of Ego at Bound for Glory. You put him in the main event Mafia to take out the Aces of Eights. They sort of abandon that after a while and move into a feud with Ego. Those guys start trolling Magnus week after week. And now he's going to face Sting at Bound for Glory, based on unrelated buildup that was so subtle that a lot of people may not have even picked up on it. That buildup doesn't seem as effective as it could be. The match makes sense, I guess, but I think people would be more hyped for it if they'd had a better idea that it was coming. But you didn't know what it was all building toward until this week, so you never got a chance to anticipate it, really. Now, I am excited for it, but that's mostly due to how good the performances were in this segment. Magnus is an underrated actor, in my opinion. I believe that he was pretty damn upset here, and that this was something that was really eating at him. And Sting made it feel significant by drawing comparisons to himself and Flair back in the day, so it's really due to the strength of their promos here that this feels like a make-or-break match for Magnus now. These two guys managed to save this angle and made it feel like a Bound for Glory match, even though they weren't done many favors by build-up that was really underplayed. And something interesting about this, they're trying to sell it like Magnus is in a slump, even though he's really not. I mean, he lost in the finals of the BFG series, but he still made it to the finals. And here, he beat 2 out of 3 guys and only lost to the third because they cheated. That's pretty damn good from where I sit. But the story is that he demands so much from himself, and he's not satisfied that he hasn't been able to win the big one, and he's always the guy that gets this close but comes up short. Assuming he beats Sting at Bound for Glory, getting that big rub, and I think he will, all things considered, I'm not sure how you can keep him out of the world title picture after that. I mean, the way they've set this up, if he beats Sting, then he kind of has to win the title fairly soon. If they want to strike while the iron's hot, I figure he's got to be in serious contention by the UK tour. But presumably that would make it Magnus versus AJ Styles, so someone would need to turn heel, and it's not going to be AJ. But turning Magnus around that time would be risky. Magnus being hashtag Team Dixie does make sense, but the timing is going to be really screwed up here. But back to my earlier point. The X Division title match is kind of set up in the same way. You've got a bunch of guys who have had history with each other over the last few months. Manic with Aries, Aries with Sabin, Sabin with Manic. Yeah, they kind of all had issues in these separate storylines, but it didn't really seem to tie together clearly. So you had to figure they were going to do something, but you didn't know what until they said, hey, let's have an Ultimate X. You look back, and only now, in hindsight, does it make sense. These three guys in an Ultimate X makes sense. But then you throw Jeff Hardy in there, and that's when this kind of feels haphazardly thrown together. It's like they were scrambling to come up with a reason to get Hardy on the show, and as a result, his inclusion doesn't really mean what it should. I mean, honestly, Kenny King has more of a reason to be in the match than Hardy, but he's fucking Jeff Hardy and he needs a pay-per-view spot. To answer your question, no, I don't know why Kenny isn't in the match either.
Oh, what a bunch of bull.
Jeff Hardy being in an Ultimate X match for the first time should feel like a bigger deal than this. But the announcement was kind of deflated by the dead crowd, the fact that they're obviously just throwing him in there to get him on the show, and the fact that Ultimate X doesn't mean what it used to anymore because they've overdone it so much. So, at long last, in the opening segment, we finally got some hype for the Bound for Glory main event. And I say some because they were kind of splitting their focus here. AJ Styles and Bully Ray acknowledged each other, which in itself was a big improvement over recent weeks. But they were also talking a lot about Dixie Carter. And I know the Dixie thing is part of this big new creative direction, but is this really what we should be focusing on right now? They've set this up to where Dixie is going to have to play some kind of a role in that match, but we don't know what kind of role that is. Just like with this other stuff, it's building up to something, but we don't know what. But in order to get excited for it, we need to have some idea of what we're getting. I like the Dixie angle. I do. But when the two guys in your world title match are talking more about Dixie Carter in an angle that only relates to the match in ways that haven't been revealed yet, then I can't get excited for the match because I don't know what I'm in for. The title match is tied to this somehow, but in a way that makes it feel secondary to it. So without knowing where the Dixie angle is going, how am I supposed to care about the title match? This buildup is very strange, and right now, I'm concerned about how effective or ineffective it's going to be. We had a #1 contenders knockout match that never really got started. Lady Tapa showed up and destroyed Velvet Sky, so I guess the whole thing got thrown out. I'm gonna sound like such a mark. I have bitched for so long about how TNA needed to bring in new knockouts, and we've got a new one right here, and now I'm gonna complain about it. I feel like shit doing this, but here we go. I'm not a fan of Lady Tapa. I'm just not. Maybe it's a personal preference thing, I don't know, but going by what I've seen from her in OVW, I don't think she's ready for TV yet. She still seems awfully sloppy to me, and you saw this a little bit when she was kicking Velvet on the mat, but she moves awkwardly sometimes, like she isn't sure what to do with her size, if that makes any sense. Then there's her character, and this is what really bugs me. I have no clue what she's going for with all this yelling and flailing around. She's trying to act like some kind of savage cave woman or something, and it's over the top to the point of being cartoonish. And she's yelling all the time. I mean, for God's sake, Mischief doesn't scream this much. She's trying way too hard to be intimidating, and I hate to make the Kong comparison, I really do, because I know everyone and their brother is going to be doing that, but Kong didn't have to try to be intimidating. She just was. If she could scare you with a look, and that was all she needed. But Tapa is going so overboard with this stuff, like, my ring! My island! Bow down! I mean, it just feels really unnatural to me. I mean, good Lord, woman, dial it back about 80%. Jesus Christ! I look at her and I can't help thinking, this is not the character this woman should be playing. I'm not sure what the right character for her is exactly, but it's not this. This is just silly. See, this is why I thought it was a mistake to sign her instead of Ivelisse. Aside from the fact that Ivelisse was a lot more polished, she had her style and her gimmick and her character all worked out. I didn't get that impression from Lady Tapa, and I still don't. Maybe I'm way off base here. Maybe she'll prove me wrong. I sure hope she does. But I'm just not digging this woman right now. I'm not going to judge her just yet. I'm going to give her some time. Hopefully she'll win me over, but I'm skeptical. The main event is Bully Ray versus Samoa Joe, which you'd think would be a pretty big deal, but was basically ignored all night. Joe has the match won, but the ref is out. Bully decides he can't win the match clean, so he knocks Joe out with a chain, which the ref does see, and then gives Joe the win by DQ. Bully tries to hurt Joe post-match, but AJ Styles stops him. The match was okay, I guess, but not as good as you'd think. They didn't get out of first gear, which this close to Bound for Glory is very troubling. It also didn't do much for Bully Ray. It shows you that he can hurt a guy, but we already knew that. What it did not show, something that's more important at this point, is that he can effectively win a match. I mean, the cheap-ass DQ finish? Really? Your biggest show of the year is in 2 weeks, guys. Isn't it time to get serious here? If you didn't want Bully to go over Joe clean, then why did you put them in a match at all?
I will not participate in this charade this evening.
To be brutally honest, this final segment kind of made me sick. I do really like Dixie Carter's heel character. I think she's doing a great job with it, and it appears that Hulk Hogan is gone finally. Sure as hell not complaining about that. But the way this was done was so distasteful to me, I wanted to throw something. You have the subtle implications of the sexual propositioning with the Dixie train comments, which says all sorts of negative things about Dixie, and not necessarily in a good heel heat way. Then Hogan quits, walks out, and abandoning every single shred of dignity she has, Dixie drops to her knees, clutches his leg, and begs him to stay. So, in what is supposedly his final segment on Impact, Hogan walks out with his head held high, while the company president gets completely humiliated, and by extension, the company itself gets thrown under the bus.
You could have done the right thing, but you didn't have the balls.
So the end result is that Hogan looks untouchable, and the newly minted heel Dixie Carter gets cut off at the knees and completely undermined. And really, with Hogan having creative control and Bischoff in charge of creative right now, were you really surprised? Were you expecting anything else? Were you expecting him to do the respectful thing? Let Dixie fire him and look strong, considering she's the whole crux of this big new creative direction they're embarking on? Yeah, like there was any chance of that. This was disgusting. It was degrading, mean-spirited, and incredibly selfish. Welcome to Hulk Hogan, everyone!
You're nothing but a selfish prick!
Hogan basically shits on the company president on his way out the door, making them look worse for having brought him in the first place. Classy. If that was the last time we see him in TNA, let it serve as a reminder that at the end of the day, Hogan is out for Hogan and no one else. Let us never speak of him again.
Now forever leave my presence. Leave this ring, leave this building, leave the state. I think you should be exiled from the United States of America.
They're finally getting around to announcing pay-per-view matches, even though they should have been doing that weeks ago. But the build-up is really questionable, and this Dixie angle is overshadowing them all right now. It seems to be taking precedence over every match on the card, and since we still don't know how it pertains to Bound for Glory exactly, that's not helping the situation. Right now, the only match I'm excited for is Sting and Magnus, and that's only because those guys really nailed it with their promos this week. You've only got 2 more impacts left to build this thing up, TNA. If you ever plan on actually turning on the hype machine for Bound for Glory, you better do it now.